Coming at you with a 22.25 day Colorado Trail itinerary. This is going to be super valuable for anybody that is going to be doing the CT. Specifically, if you're using the Guthook app, if you've been doing research, there is no tent sites on there. So I'm going to kind of give you a play-by-play of where exactly I camped and what happened in between each of the days. I'm going to give out an original copy of my spreadsheet for the Colorado Trail as well as my northbound route of the John Muir Trail. In the spreadsheet, it has elevation and it has some of the notes that I am talking about here, as well as the days and the campsites of each. If you want a little template like this, click the link in the description below, give me your email address, and I will send that out promptly. Okay, so day one, this is where the 0.25 comes from because I got dropped off at about 5 p.m. and I camped at about 9 p.m. I recommend that you start early on this because it can be pretty exposed in the canyon, and it was actually pretty hot even when I was shaded. And I actually ended up seeing a bear right past the dam. Day two, I went to a site a little bit past Tramway Creek. This was a dry camp spot, and the reason I went past Tramway Creek was because there's already too many people in the campsite and it was storming at the time, so it was about 6 p.m. and I had to go a little bit past that, so that's where I ended up. It was just basically in the middle of nowhere. On day three, I made it to a stream at mile 57.1. Well, this day was pretty gnarly because I had to dry out from everything from the storm the day before, but then I ended up getting stormed on again later in the day, so that was kind of a moot point. However, I got to that stream, and that was the first day that altitude actually started really kicking my butt, and that was also the day that I discovered I did not have my first aid kit, so I'd had 0 ibuprofen and a really bad headache. This was also the day that I saw people turning around, several people actually, turning around back to quit because we actually crossed a trailhead right where I was going to dry my stuff out at. From there, I made it to a seasonal stream at mile 80.8, and not much to say about this day besides that you're starting to get into the high country at this point, and it was probably the best views out of the first 100 miles for sure. The next day, I made it to Breckenridge to pick up my resupply. Now, this was awesome too. There was a lot of good views on this day. However, just be aware of the mountain bikers on this because there was one probably every 5 minutes, I would say. It was quite insane actually. Be aware of your headphones if you have your headphones in. There's a bus that goes into Breck, and there's also ones that go to other places. So if you need some sort of a different resupply or if you need shoes or something like that, you can catch a bus and go somewhere else as well. Now, a pro tip is when you go under the bridge and you pop out, you want to go to the left to catch the bus. Don't go to the right, obviously, because then you're going to miss the bus like I did. So day 6, I made it to Copper Mountain. Now, this was an unexpected plan. Up until this point, my itinerary was spot on with what I wanted to do at the get-go. And I should preface this by saying that I had to have some sort of a backstop itinerary because I only got so many days off of work and I had needed to get it done within about a 3-week time span. This was an unexpected stop because the bus out of Breckenridge, the first one goes out very late. So I didn't get to the trailhead until about 9 a.m. And then I met IB Tat, I met thru hikers on TikTok, I met all these people and I was kind of screwing around, and by the time I got up to the pass, it started thunderstorming. So I was stuck in a storm for 2-3 hours, and by the time I rolled into Copper Mountain, I was soaking wet. There was no tent sites really before or after Copper. And so I got food, tried to warm up, didn't really warm up that well. So then I went on a wild goose chase to figure out how to rent a hotel. And I finally did, and I paid way too much money. The one good thing about Copper Mountain is I finally got enough sleep, so the next day I booked it to the Tennessee Pass trailhead. Now, this was really cool too because it started getting more into the high country as well. I would say for the CT, especially the first 100 miles were very, very lame in my opinion. A lot of it was through the trees, it was kind of dry, it was pretty deserty. Once you got out of Breckenridge, it was pretty cool. So you go over the first saddle called Surly Pass. Now, I thought this was the big pass, the big climb of the day. However, it was still another few miles to Kokomo Pass, but freaking awesome views at each place. Now, when I got to the Tennessee Pass trailhead, I kind of took a gamble because I didn't know if I could sleep there or not, but I figured because it was a trailhead, there would probably be some flat spots. Actually, there was. It was probably my most level camp spot of the entire journey. There was some other people camp by as well. Obviously, there's a privy there. That was cool. And I swear to you that I heard wolves that night. But people say I might be lying, but that's what I thought I heard. They were not coyotes. So day 8, I just made it to mile 171. This was another dry camp, basically because all my camp spots were taken up, and really not much happened this day that I can remember. Even when I look back on the videos, I don't really see much that happened. Day 9, I made it to the Clear Creek campground. This was kind of a unique day because, number one, I made a short hitch into Twin Lakes to see if they had any lotion that I could use for the rash on my legs. They didn't. However, I got some really, really good food and BS'd with some of the locals in there, and that was really cool. You can walk into Twin Lakes, but I didn't want to, and I got a hitch in about 12 minutes. They say that's usually the most common thing. And then just met an older couple on the way out, and they hitched me back out. Now, you're gonna be walking around the Twin Lakes after this, so make sure that you top your water off before heading out of Twin Lakes, or if you cross the road to continue around the lakes, because this is a very deceiving part of the Colorado Trail. And I thought, in my opinion, it was actually worse than the dry section on the fire route. And there is a lake down there, but it's kind of one of those things where it's kind of too far to go and get water, but then again, maybe you should, but then you get down there and it's really mucky, and it was just this really bad situation. It was super hot, it was super exposed, and that was probably the worst dry section for me on the CT, weirdly enough. Anyway, once you get to that point, you will hit the cutoff for the Collegiate East or Collegiate West. I took Collegiate East and made it down to the Clear Creek campground. There's a beautiful, actually a really, really nice campsite right by the river there. There is a privy in the campsite as well, so that was pretty cool to use in the morning. However, the next day, there was a ton of vertical with that day, and we only made it about 20 miles or so. And really all I can remember is that it was just a lot of vert. So the next day I actually made it to the Avalanche Trailhead, and I got a hitch into Buena Vista because I needed to go to the urgent care for my rash. Now, Buena Vista was actually really popping. There was a lot of cool restaurants there. I packed out some Mexican food and got a hitch back in, and I made it to Maxwell Creek. Now the next day is when I actually got to pick up my resupply at the Mount Princeton Hot Springs. So they have breakfast and lunch, and I think hikers are invited there. However, you can't do dinner. They do have a general store. They have a ton of tourists there, so you can yogi some food and things like that. Now the next day, I figured out I had issues with my Ultras, so I had to go get them replaced. So I got a hitch from a shuttler to Salida. One tip, stand on the other side of the road if you're going to Salida. I was on the wrong side of the road when I was doing my hitch. Salida was super cool. I also got my CBD there at a local cafe. They were super nice, really good food, could charge all your stuff. So when I got hitched back out into the trailhead, I made it to where the Collegiate East and the Collegiate West meet, and then it followed a ridge line. The only place that I figured out where I could camp was a shelter cabin, and this was another dry camp, and this is actually called Shelter Cabin on Gut Hook. A lot of surprises with this little shelter. One, it was really cool, but then two, I don't even remember how many deer were there, and very not threatened by humans at all, and they were all over my tent all night. The next day I made it to mile 288.3, which was another dry camp. Storms were off and on. Now this is kind of the approximate area that I think I set up my tent at. It didn't really have a place. I just kind of found a flat spot. There was no places kind of before or near, and the next water was actually downhill at a lake, and I wasn't about to do that. But this was a pretty good place. There was no Widowmakers or anything like that. The next day I made it to the segment 19 crossing. It was raining the entire day, and it was mostly downhill. So I think a combination of those two factors actually pushed me to go that far, but I was also very far back in my itinerary as well. This is also when you're gonna start experiencing the cow ponds, which if you watched any of my previous videos, you will know you should probably bring 2 filters in order to get through this section, or try to make sure that there's some sort of trail magic around. Hey, can you bring me my water, dude?
Yeah, 1 second.
Thank you. Now the next day was a slow going day. It was basically uphill the entire time. I knew there was a lot of vertical with this day. However, it really didn't seem to peak out really until the end, which was at a saddle. And if you take a right, you can take a trail up and summit St. Louis Peak, which is a 13 or 14er. This also presented my only significant creek crossing where I actually had to get my feet wet. Day after that, I was trying to make it into Lake City, which I did do, but I missed the shuttle at, I believe it was noon. What I ended up doing is I had to hitch in, and the locals were super cool. I got hitched in about 20 minutes or so. The one thing though is that highway doesn't experience too much traffic, so you were waiting quite a long time between cars. I stayed at the Alpine Moose Lodge, and it was super good. They had a pizza room attached to it, which was dope. I had a huge pizza. Yeah, Lake City wasn't too bad. There's not much in terms of hiker gear and stuff like that, but there is food for resupplies. And I picked up my resupply at the Silver Spur Inn. So the next day I got a hitch back into the trail. Now the shuttler was supposed to leave at I think 12:30 or something, or 12, maybe that was it. But nobody came. We waited at the meeting place for an hour and a half. Finally, somebody got wind of it, and another volunteer shuttler came and picked us up, got us back to the trailhead. This was a very short day because I spent a lot of the morning in Lake City. Eventually ended up camping in some flat area at mile about 367.2. Really cool area at the top of a good climb, and worked out pretty well, especially because it was setting up for the Colorado high point the next day. The next day was probably the hardest day on trail. Basically, the trail didn't get really below 12 or 13,000 feet for the majority of the day. There were several passes that you had to get up and then come back down and go up and then come back down, and it was entirely exposed. This was also the day that you reached the Colorado high point, and it was also the day that I had my full resupply, so I think that's also what made it hard as well. That night, I camped at mile 3, around 390.3 under this rock outcropping. There's another dry camp, and at about midnight, actually a storm came in and lasted for a couple hours. What hurts?
Right on my butt cheek.
Next day was, again, kind of through the high country, but you're starting to get a little bit lower. Now, one thing that I was reading the Gut Hooks comments was that there's a local sheep herder in the area. It's bad for two reasons. Number one, the water sources are contaminated with a lot of the sheep shit. And then number two, sounds like they have kind of two big dogs with them as well. So apparently they attack hikers. I saw the sheep, however, they were too far away to actually do anything to me, and I didn't see any dogs. Now the next day was the day that I encountered my biggest storm on trail. I got stuck in there, and I was stuck in the trees for about an hour and a half. But I ended up making it 24.7 miles, and I got set up right before Black Hawk Pass. My last camp on trail ended up at Taylor Lake. And after you get over Black Hawk Pass, you kind of go through, there's a little bit of a dry section, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Trail Magic also stocked some of the trailheads with some water. However, I never really needed it. But the issue with this day was, I believe it was called Indian Ridge, but there was a miles and miles of ridge line that you cross where it's very exposed, obviously. Storms kicked up at the afternoon again, obviously, and I kind of waited some out, but then we just kind of made a break for it, got over, and then made it to Taylor Lake. But just be aware if you're traveling those ridges when you see some clouds pop up. The last day on trail was a very easy downhill. The one thing about it though is that it's pretty dense. It kind of reminded me of the Oregon coast at some points, and you're actually getting water washed with ferns and things like that. I mean, I pretty much didn't really have to take a shower once I got into town because of it. For those interested in my JMT itinerary, I'll post that right up here. And again, if you want a copy of this on a Google spreadsheet, click the link in the description below and I will send you a free copy. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you found value in this content.